What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Frank Analysis. I'm here joined by Fiorella Isabel, who's on the ground right now in Peru. The Convo Couch has gone international. It's amazing to see your work there on the ground, Fiorella. So I've been streaming here about what's been going on with the elections, as has the Convo Couch. The last time we covered this, Pedro Castillo, who's the socialist candidate, is winning by a thread so far against Keiko Fujimori, who's the right-wing fascist candidate, daughter of a dictator. So yeah, Fiorella, let us know like what have you been seeing on the ground in Peru?
Yeah, so it's extremely divided in Lima, right? Lima is Keiko territory. There's no denying that. However, there is a segment of the population in Lima, and also people have come from the outskirts of nearby cities who have come into the center of town in Lima. El Centro de Peru is the area, and they have been outside since last night, have been marching, protesting against claims of election fraud. There have been various claims. I spoke to Medea Benjamin earlier, where she was claiming that people were accusing others of being paid off to vote for Keiko Fujimori. We've also seen from other videos the ballot stuffing for Keiko Fujimori, and people complaining that their ballots were pre-filled. So they were complaining and saying that this was a fraudulent election because Keiko Fujimori has been known to pay people off, to buy her support, whether it was for something that she wanted in relation to her corporate history, or whether it was something as simple as actually just like bribing the Peruvian soccer team to vote for her. So that has been the sentiment of people. They really do not like the media. They kind of gloss over the fact that there is independent media, so they're more friendly to independent media, but a lot of the anger that's been directed to has been to the media. There was an incident with one of the Castillo protesters throwing like a coin, and the
Yeah.
media guy reacted and started punching the guy, kind of turned around the story, making it like he was the victim and he was the one who started punching the guy. I'm obviously against, any sort of like attack of media in general, but the media here, just like the media in the United States, is extremely corrupt and extremely corporate and bought, and they hugely favor Keiko Fujimori. And the OPEC is the organization in charge of the elections, and the head of that organization was part of the party Fuerza Popular, and was meeting with Keiko Fujimori recently. So there's just a bunch of distrust, as well as the fact that the mainstream media has tried to paint Pedro Castillo as this radical communist terrorist, not just communist, a
Mm-hmm.
terrorist. And so people who are for Castillo have almost been like quiet in Lima, because they're like, well, I'm not a terrorist, but I like Castillo. Like and we know he's not a terrorist. The guy is like, what would be equivalent to like a union teacher in the United States, like somebody that's running for workers first, who wants some money to stay in the country. Obviously, his policies are going to be more focused on Peru, because he's trying to have no poor people in a rich country, which is what people have been saying, right? Like there shouldn't be poor people in the rich country. And the enthusiasm for him is extremely strong, in terms of right outside where he just appeared recently to say hi from his balcony. Then he went back inside. So he hasn't appeared in front of the press yet. He was supposed to have a press conference earlier today. We were all waiting for him. It was canceled for whatever reasons, but people were still in the streets, cheering, being extremely happy, telling us the press that Keiko Fujimori is corrupt. She has no integrity. She's awful. She's going to sink Peru, and that Pedro Castillo is the winner. A lot of people are saying they would have already declared him the winner. It's weird that they haven't declared him the winner. She refuses to concede, however, and so we're still there. But the latest is actually right behind me. I just got
Mm-hmm.
these results right there. You guys can see it. Franco, I'll let you read it.
Yeah, I'm also pulling it up here on Twitter. This is the ONPE Twitter page. So yeah, it's like right now it's loading up real quick. Pedro Castillo is like at 50.2%, right? And Keiko Fujimori is Hang on a sec. All right, it's taking too long to load. All right, there we go. And then it went away. But it was like 49. It was like 49 point something percent. But yeah, it's like very neck and neck. Yesterday
But
when I had my cousin on, we were talking about like the parallels that is in that's in Peru with the United States with the mainstream media. Like we remember like during the primaries in 2016 how the mainstream media favored Hillary Clinton. The same thing is happening with Keiko Fujimori. The mainstream media there is favoring Keiko. This is what happened during Alberto Fujimori's regime when he was president in the 90s. The mainstream media was bought off by him. Like this is a family that has a lot of power. And so this authoritarianism will continue because they're going to control the narrative. Um, so are like what are you seeing are you seeing like a lot of propaganda like around in the street or anything? Are you seeing any like similarities also with some nationalist propaganda and the way that people are behaving also? Like my cousin was comparing the way that Keiko is promoting like her message in a very nationalistic way, like how Trump was doing with Make America Great Again, and with Biden with returning the soul of America, and saying like, oh, if you don't vote for Trump, you're not American, or you're like a Chinese spy. In Peru, like people are wearing like the soccer team jersey to try to symbolize, oh, like I'm for Peru because I'm voting against communism and terrorism. What's the
right.
behavior that you're seeing on there?
Yeah, it's actually I see it more like what you said actually against like a progressive running against a Democrat establishment neoliberal. And the reason being is because they say things like, I voted for democracy. I voted to stop the spread of communism. I voted for Peru. And they keep saying that they voted for democracy. Like as if, Keiko Fujimori isn't like a right-wing fascist, like she's the perfect candidate for the neocons. And so it's very interesting how they're framing it like she is like this great person that, and they're using also the identity politics of her being a woman. She consistently
Mm.
uses that in every appearance she makes, and her supporters will shout "Viva la mujer," long live women. And it's interesting to me because she, of course, is the daughter of a man who sterilized thousands of indigenous women, and even pushed her mother out in order to try to get into power, which she has no spine. I mean, she's willing to do whatever it takes for power. This is her third time running. And what's extremely important is that the money ties, right? The investment companies, the venture capitalists, the big business here have invested millions of dollars into her campaign. They are very upset right now. They're very scared. And it's to me, it's like, it's about time, because unfortunately what happens is that people in Lima, a lot of them watch mainstream media and they watch the propaganda that goes on, and that said that you are a terrorist, if you support Pedro Castillo, because he's a terrorist. And I say things like, well, there hasn't been any proof that he is a terrorist. And they'll say, yeah, but it's not even him. It's what's his name? It was Vladimir Cerrone.
Yeah, Cerrone, like the head of his party, Peru, the head of Peru Libre, right? They're saying that he's
And
like the puppet master that's controlling Pedro Castillo.
exactly, they say that Castillo is a puppet, and they repeat this like it's no other. And it's interesting because there has been literally no proof of that. And Cerrone, of course, has had accusations against him, right? He has had accusations against corruption, but I see no indication that Castillo is actually going to do anything remotely to that. He seems like a very genuine, down to earth guy who's speaking on behalf of the poor people in Peru. Like when we're talking about poverty, we're talking about like extreme poverty in the sense of, there's no, like it's hard to have electricity, running water. They live well below their means over there. And Pedro Castillo is no different. He's done interviews showing his household, showing how he lives and what they do. He's a rondero. He comes from the class of this group of men and women who go about and protect their communities from terrorists, from the abuse of the government. And one thing that is happening right now as we speak in Peru, and why so many people in the provinces are angry and upset and want Castillo to win, is that a lot of these indigenous people have land and they don't have very much built on this land. But these investors come in and they force them out when they don't want to get forced out, when they don't want to sell their land, they push them out forcibly. And so they're getting kicked out of their homes and they're left with nothing. Nobody's talking about that. That's why these people are so upset and they're angry and they threaten to be in the streets day and night until they get a fair election. And this reminds me of before. That is how the community felt before the Shining Path took hold. People in those communities, it's always those communities that are rural and indigenous in large majority, they get forgotten. They're completely forgotten and exploited and mistreated like they're lesser than, and they're mocked in the media and in entertainment in Peru. So those people are just done with it. And if you don't give a people that is angry a peaceful transition, a peaceful revolution, you're going to cause a violent revolution. And I'm just seeing the conditions of just something to happen if Castillo doesn't win, because according to them, he's already won. A lot of the papers that have been reporting the las encuestas, which are the exit, like an equivalent of exit polls, are saying that he's winning by even more than what the organization is saying, and like they refuse to admit it, right?
Yeah.
They a lot of the polls that they were pushing out, just like in the United States,
Yeah,
were
exactly.
polls that were like favoring her, and they weren't even valid polls. So it's very similar. It's crazy. It's very similar. There's a corrupt media. There's corrupt politicians. The politicians are owned but and bribed by each other. It's just more blatant. It's more like out there, the corruption. It's like obvious. Whereas in America, we hide it behind bureaucracies and just like, PR managers to do it, but it's still there. And that's what I try to tell people. And I did not see CNN or MSNBC. Like I did not see American media there. I really, really didn't. Like maybe they're taking pictures, but they weren't there in front trying to like really show what was going on. I saw all kinds of Latin American media, but I did not see any like of the mainstream media. And I'm just curious as to why they're not covering this with all the money and the resources, and people like TYT too. I didn't see them
Yeah.
there. They have money.
It's
Where are
by
they?
design. It's by like they want to keep Americans ignorant about what's happening in the other countries, and like how I was covering here for my streams. And I know you guys make this point a lot on the Convo Couch, is that domestic policy is foreign policy. Because if Keiko Fujimori wins, who's a right-wing candidate, she's able to privatize things in Peru more. These multinationals in America are going to become more powerful because they're going to be able to take all these resources and profit from those resources, these minerals in Peru. And then when they become more powerful, they have more power to influence elections, right? In the United States, they have more control over our politicians so that they can implement more policies that favor them, and then it hurts us. And we all lose. All working class people in Peru, in the United States, everywhere in the global South, we all get hurt. Another thing that I wanted to bring up to you is I don't know about you, or Johnny, but I have never had like the true Peru experience. I've had like the Lima experience, but Lima is not the entirety of Peru. The majority of Peru, does, like you said, doesn't have electricity. Like if you ask them something, like if you give them like a pop culture reference about like, I don't know, these characters that are in the MCU or comic book characters or anything like Netflix series, they're not going to know what you're talking about. But somebody in Lima might know because they have more opportunities like that. So yeah, Lima's this bubble, just like New York and DC are a bubble, or like LA, compared to what happens in the rest of the country. It's like completely different countries in Peru, because Lima has a completely different reality to what happens in the rest of the country. And that's what Pedro Castillo wants to do, is he wants to bring these people more education. He wants to improve the healthcare there in Peru. But with Keiko Fujimori, it's just more of the same. The rhetoric that she uses to try to gain support from the people in Lima and in other parts of the country that are more urbanized is that, with Pedro Castillo, there's going to be more communism. Well, if
Yeah.
that fear-mongering tactic actually were true, right? If it's true, well, how come in Ayacucho, the city where it was like the most affected by these attacks by Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path, they were affected by that the most, right? So they should be the most afraid of Pedro Castillo. But then we see that Pedro Castillo won, right? In Ayacucho, he won he got like 80% of the vote. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I was saying, I just think like the mainstream media is able to brainwash people here in Lima, where there's a lot of wealth in comparison to other parts of the country, right? You have the sectors like Miraflores, you have, the areas like Los Olivos and the nicer part of Los Olivos that are nice, and you have the business sector. And you can tell like it's shifted. Well, when I came here in 2005, there weren't as many like McDonald's or corporate American type of places. Now you see more of that, and you see it in a lot of touristy places, which is by the beach and right near the area of Miraflores, and right in the area where you can see the I think it's called the La Playa Verde, La Costa Verde. It's the coast right there. It kind of looks like Santa Monica at times. You have like the high-end restaurants, all of these things. So these people are just like completely brainwashed by that culture of like capitalism, where like they think that, and this is a propaganda that you see in the streets, right? Oh, se van los ricos. Oh, the rich people are leaving. I'm not going to have a job. You have poor people, like really poor, working class delivery drivers, Uber drivers, taxi drivers saying, "Oh no, I want Keiko to win because, like they're gonna all the foreign investors and all the people who have money are gonna leave Peru, and we're not gonna have jobs." And I'm thinking to myself, when have these people ever made your life better? When it's the same type of mentality that a lot of the working class, unfortunately, also miseducated, right? It's not even uneducated, it's miseducated a lot of times. They learn the wrong things because the media is so strong here. The media influences and manipulates everything. And so they start like lacking this education of what's really happening, and they stay in their bubble, and they start repeating talking points that just, they're not in the class. Like, you're working class, you're not going to benefit from a Keiko Fujimori presidency, trust me. But they are convinced that Pedro Castillo is this terrorist. And and like, I know I have family here who are convinced that Pedro Castillo is going to somehow like destroy them. He's going to go after the money of people who are doing, who aren't making a lot of money, but they're not poor either. So they're like afraid, and it's like, you're all working class regardless, none of you are millionaires. So why don't you start understanding like where like what is going on here? And I try to talk about American imperialism. A lot of them talk about Venezuelans, and I can tell that Pedro Castillo's Peru Libre has distanced itself from any comparison to
Yeah, they.
to Nicolas Maduro.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, it's not fair to talk about Venezuela like they're just like this terrible, terrible country, when without talking about the sanctions that America is placing on them still, and how what we did, how instrumental we were, and how they're supposed to be a rich country. They have oil. They have a lot of oil. And you Peruvians have a lot of minerals. You have a lot of lithium, right? I mean, Bolivia, I think maybe Mexico has slightly more, but Peru's right there at the amount of lithium, and that's going to be obviously hugely important for the fourth industrial revolution. That is something I fear, that if somebody like Keiko Fujimori would win, Peruvians value, like the Amazon, like the minerals, like the earth that is very, it's so easy to grow vegetables here, to grow your own food. They have all kinds of potatoes, all kinds of corn. All of that is gone. The more you continue to privatize this country, and it's already freaking privatized, and what they do
Yeah.
is they take the money, these politicians, they take the money that's allotted to, say, fix the roads, and they don't fix the roads. They pay themselves off, and it's a form of money laundering, and it's just scheming, and people know that that's happening. But again, even people who know that that's happening, we're like, well, I'd rather have the evil that I know than this guy that I don't know. And it's so similar to how it happened with Trump versus Biden sometimes, and Bernie versus Hillary. And even when you look at how they called Bernie a communist and a Russian agent both times he ran, when we know he's barely, center left, and if anything, he would be a social democrat. But it's this whole idea that they're painting that Castillo is this red, and they call them los rojos, que esto, que lo otro,
Oh,
but they're not. None of these people. I mean, I'm telling you, like I don't even. They're more conservative on certain things too. They're not
so on
even.
social
They're on
issues
drugs,
especially.
on social issues. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, like my since my I have a lot of family members who live in Lima, and a lot of
Yeah.
them have been seeing like my Facebook posts. And they're like, "Oh no, el Bruno le están consumiendo los rojos." Like Bruno's being eaten by the Reds, like the communists. He's buying into these narratives. You brought up Venezuela, which is a talking point that they use. Like they're like, we can't allow Peru to become like Venezuela. Like they think that Venezuela is like that because of Maduro's policies. When there's a study by the Center for Economic and Policy Research that shows that the reason why Venezuela is like that is because of the U.S. sanctions, and that because of these U.S. sanctions, it's killed tens of thousands of people there. And just to remind people, there's more homeless people in the United States than there are people in total in Venezuela, just to give you guys a perspective. And it's actually Maduro's social policies that are helping the people there. Um, but I tell my family members this. Like I send them these documents. I'm like, look at this. Like here's a study. They just disregard it. I send them like documents showing like government documents talking about how they want to control the population. And so and showing them like this is how like Alberto Fujimori in the 90s tried to sterilize people like in these rural areas to control the indigenous population. They don't want to look at it. They're so comfortable just believing in their narrative that they hear from the mainstream news, similar to how it is in the United States. So there's a lot of work to do for people like us in independent media to inform people about what's happening, and also going on the ground and showing footage, which is why it's so excellent what you're doing is you're informing everybody here on the United States to see these similarities. And so the message can get out, and so that people that have family here in the United States that are Peruvian can show their family as well. And then hopefully that can also be sent over to the families in Peru and see, all right, so I'm just consuming too much mainstream media and they're lying to me.
Yeah,
Um,
and one
but
thing on
yeah,
that Venezuela situation, what's happened here that's turned a lot of people with this sort of xenophobia against Venezuelans, and some Colombians now too, escaping, is the fact that what these corporations do, what these elites do, is they refuse to hire Peruvians and pay them the living wage. They have to pay them, I think the minimum is 800 soles a month. And so what they do is they hire Venezuelans for way less. And so then what happens is these Peruvians don't have jobs as much. So it's harder
yeah,
for them to find jobs. Why? Because they're pretty much doing what the United States government does to workers in America, except obviously in a bigger scale. They're outsourcing jobs for cheap labor so they can make a bigger profit by not paying people the wages they should pay them. So it's honestly it's gross, but that's part of why a lot of Peruvians are like, using the whole Venezuela, Venezuela, this, because they see Venezuelans coming here and they see, Venezuelans here where they normally work is they'll do anything, right? So they work like they'll be ambulantes, which are, the people that just sell candy or sell little things here and there. They'll work in stores, they'll work in the kitchen, they'll work as servers, etc. But they start paying them less than they do a Peruvian. So essentially they're second class citizens.
hmm
And so all these companies can start making a profit, and it's that mentality of like, oh, they're just here, whatever, we'll just use them. And that's not their fault. It's not Venezuela's fault. It's the corruption in Peru that's allowing them to not pay normal people a living wage, right? And that's also part of the issue. And Venezuelans who come here, like, not all of them hate Maduro, but I mean a lot of them were never like partial to him to begin with. So and I know for a fact that Venezuela isn't what is described here at all. Like there are things that are open in Venezuela. They have like normal commerce. Like it's not what it's being painted out to be if you actually go there. The next time I want to go to Venezuela, like that's like the other place I'd want to go, because I want to dispel like a lot of the things that are being said here. And again, it just reminds me of how they're turning poor people against each other. They turn the working class against the other, point the finger at Venezuelans. So you don't look at people like Keiko Fujimori and all her minions in Congress, which she's like at 20 something percent of Congress is like pro Keiko, but they've bought off a lot of the other parties to cooperate with them, while the Peru Libre has like 30 something percent. They have more. But trust me, if Pedro Castillo wins, he's going to face a lot of opposition
Oh
from
yeah,
Congress,
from the
who is
media too,
Congress.
from the
Oh,
media
the media Congress, yeah.
because right, they've been pretty much campaigning for Keiko this whole time. I wanted to ask you more about this, which you tweeted out. Let me pull this up for everybody. So you talked about Piero Corvetto, right? Who's the head of the ONPE, which is the website we were just looking at, which is showing the election results, and how there's a conflict of interest there because he used to be a part of the Peruvian intelligence, right, intelligence community, and he was also a former member of Keiko's party. And
Yep.
then he met with Keiko, right? So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, okay. So as you said, Piero Corretto was the head of the ONPE, the Oficina Nacional de Procesos Electorales. That office not only has him in charge of Peru's elections, which is a conflict of interest because he and Keiko met up. It was caught even in the mainstream media. They asked about why he met up with her. He refused to answer. And also, like I said, he was an ex-member of the party, but also, like you just said, he worked for the National Intelligence, and Fernando Rospiligosi was
Mm.
also the other guy. He was also a member of Fuerza Popular. And they basically what the ONPE is doing is they have made a contract, and I didn't get a chance to put this out, but I'm going to put it in this article. They made a contract with this company that is part of a lawsuit, a multi corporate lawsuit against all these corporations for money laundering, for embezzlement. The the ONPE made a contract with them. They have a contract with this company that has been condemned for corruption, and that company is also involved in the elections, and that's a whole other thing too, in addition to this, right? And I was kind of equating it to Alex Padilla of
Mm-hmm.
California, or any other Secretary of State actually having the conflict of interest where, Alex Padilla was campaigning for Hillary Clinton in 2016, obviously voicing his support for her while simultaneously being in charge of the elections in California in 2016. And we know how the elections turned out. They were absolutely disastrous. And then again, it happened in 2020. The same exact thing happened. And so there are no laws about this, like in most places. Now Georgia is passing or attempting to pass the law, the Georgia Senate bill, where they prevent the Secretary of State to have an affiliation with any candidate. But at the same time, it's a little late now, I mean, for America. But I mean, that's part of the whole thing where people don't realize, like, Peru is, yes, this happens in Peru, but also this happens in the United States. This happens in a lot of places, and it's really gross. People here don't trust the ONPE. They actually went yesterday to protest there. But what happened is, I don't know if you saw, they fenced it off, and they had the cops stand behind the fence. And it reminded me of the many times I've covered protests and there's cops there. Now, I didn't see the cops get violent or anything like that with the protesters. I just saw them stand there. And in fact, the cops in Peru are a little bit more meek than I would have thought. They were armed in gear, and then you saw
Mm-hmm.
the military out, but they weren't like menacing, in my opinion. I mean, trust me, they were carrying live rounds, at least the
Yeah.
military was, but they didn't feel like to me that they were like, as like, I think if you saw like a crowd of people running into like an election, blah blah, election place, and a building where they're, it's in charge of the elections. Let's say they go into the board of supervisors, etc. You'd have a bunch of like the LAPD and the sheriff's department right there, and I saw them there, but it wasn't like they were really that threatening. But yeah, that's an organization that's in charge of the elections, that has obvious conflicts of interest, that has people working for it with who have loyalty to Keiko Fujimori. She may not be a popular candidate in terms of likability, but she has a lot of power. And like you said, her family, all of them are in charge for something. Like her
Yeah.
brother Kenji, he's in trouble for drug trafficking. She's in trouble for money laundering and just taking money from Montesinos, who was Fujimori's right-hand man during the time of her father's presidency, to pay for her school, and that for with people's like with money indicated, designated for Peruvians. And her other brother is involved in some sort of crime as well. So if she got into power, she would forgive them. And it would also just send a message that a family that powerful could just do away with the law. Also, the guy who is pursuing the litigation against her has been threatened multiple times on numerous occasions. So it's really crazy to me, just looking at the parallels too, like of how similar. There's corruption everywhere, and
Yeah.
sometimes we feel like in the U.S., oh my God, this is so bad, blah blah blah. There's corruption everywhere, but Peruvians, that's the one thing, Franco, I do want to mention. They will get out in the streets and get rid of whoever they don't like. I do not see that happening in America. They have done it before. That's why I say this. They have done it before with previous presidents. This has just happened. Like in November, we saw all of the things that happened. And so in America, though, I just, them saying election fraud. Now you saying election fraud in
Mm.
America, you must be a right winger,
Yeah.
nationalist Trump supporter.
Yeah, we were just talking about that earlier today in my stream. It's like now if you like they care more about election integrity in Peru. Like we're seeing people are like, yeah, we're gonna make sure that there's no fraud. There's people out there with their little things that show like no al fraude, like no to fraud. Like this is something that both sides care about. But we know that like what I was discussing like with my cousin and with the stream earlier, and I know you've been discussing this as well, is that they're going to claim that there was election fraud in favor of Castillo, because they're going to be like, oh, look at all these votes that came in later when the rural votes, like the votes from the mountain and the jungle came in, and they all went to Castillo. Like, how is that possible? Like, there's already like right wing journalists that are saying that, and I was showing like tweets that they were putting out earlier today. This is what they did with Evo Morales. Right, they were saying like, oh, how is it possible that he gained all these votes later on? And then we know what happened, a coup. So I wanted to ask you, like, do you think that there's going to be some kind of coup that happens if Pedro Castillo wins? So one more time for everybody, just so they can see, Pedro Castillo is leading right now at 50.265% to Keiko's 49.735%. Yeah, what do you think, Fiorella? Do you think that there's going to be people in the streets that are going to be following the mainstream narrative, saying that there was fraud, that Castillo committed election fraud, and then they're going to be out in the street trying to get him out? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think honestly, so here's what I think. I think that if Keiko somehow manages to win, and with the blatant, it would have to be blatant fraud at this point. This is what reminds me of the election between Trump and Biden, right? Because I have two behind me, right? You see
Yeah.
the it's at least 8 million votes right there, right? 8.5 or something million votes. It is statistically almost impossible. The mainstream media is even saying this now, for Keiko to catch up to Pedro Castillo. So if she were to win somehow, right, these people would rise up. They would come from everywhere and demand that she be removed. Not just because of Pedro Castillo, not just because they're like in love with Pedro Castillo. It's not even about Pedro Castillo. It is about stopping her, and it's also about stopping the privatization of Peru, stopping the giveaways to multinational corporations. That's what this is about here. If keeping all the money and the resources back into Peru, that 70% of all of this goes outside of Peru. No more poor people in a rich country. That shouldn't happen. But if Pedro Castillo wins, there have been several journalists, political analysts of the country, that have said that you could see a coup here because of what happened with Augusto Pinochet. Augusto Pinochet and what happened in Chile was very similar. Augusto Pinochet came in, they pushed a coup. against the previous president that was there. They pushed him to a point where he committed suicide before he was captured. And then Pinochet went on and killed every leftist and every left affiliated group, and ruled by his own decree with blood and just complete dictatorship. And so that is a fear that Pedro Castillo will face. He will, at the very least, face an opposition in Congress. He's going to likely face threats. He's going to likely face just complete and total smear jobs. You know, I've been told by sources here that the whole debacle that happened in the province, I forget which province it was, but where they wrote the letter where Shining Path claimed that they were that they were the ones who did these, who committed these murders against these people, including children. That recently happened, right? And so all of the mainstream media was claiming that it was CNN. CNN was claiming, MSNBC, the Washington Post, all of them were claiming that, yes, this is confirmed that it's a Shining Path. But it was it was weirdly done. It was a letter that specifically said, oh, this is us, and you can't let these people vote in this election. It was very strange the way it was done. And people close to the area have said that they didn't know who these people were. They weren't from the area, that they thought it was weird. And some people are convinced that that was like a false flag event pushed to create animosity and distrust to Pedro Castillo, who has continuously been tied to the Shining Path, even though he has on multiple occasions has said he has no ties to them. And there are no money ties, because the guy doesn't even have like a freaking Twitter page. He's not this, this guy. He's not even an eloquent speaker. He's none of these things. This is about getting rid of the corruption in Peru. And so, yes, he's going to face a lot of trouble from these multinational corporations, from these elites. And I believe the United States, then, if they feel like they can interfere, or they feel like they need to because of some monetary gain, they might do something too. I mean, earlier, Medea Benjamin was like, well, this at least it's not Trump, because Trump would like outright do this. And I'm thinking to myself, like, have you met Anthony Blinken? I mean, yes, it's not going to be as overt. It's not going to be as overt, but Anthony Blinken is actually an expert in making it look like a covert operation and helping humanity. And since there is opposition to Castillo, especially in the largely media favored popular Lima, then that could potentially be something where they could push a coup to say that the people of Peru don't want him there. He's going to have to be prepared. A long story short, because he has a lot of enemies, and these enemies are going to come after him and his family, and he needs to really understand that it's important to have the military and the police on your side. And a lot of the police, I think, in this area at least, supported Keiko Fujimori.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing too. Yeah, that attack that happened recently also, there's no as far as I know, from the articles that I've been receiving, there's no evidence to suggest that it was Sendero Luminoso. There's no experts that went there and studied to see and show and prove that it was Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path, that committed those attacks. But the mainstream media is running with the narrative that it was Sendero Luminoso to create the fear-mongering narrative, again, once again, to frighten everybody against Pedro Castillo and be like, oh, look, see, he's a terrorist. Look at all, like, there's going to be more terrorism when he's president. But what they're not seeing, right, is like the reason why are there terrorist attacks in the first place? It's because people are feeling desperate because they don't have their basic needs met. They don't have good health care. They don't have education, so they're not like conscious enough to see like what's the best path that they can do so that they can have as many people on their side as they can. Or how they can convince the urban people to join their movement. They have family members that die from diseases that are so curable. Like, they don't have the same opportunities as all these people in the city do to get out of their situations where they don't have electricity, they barely have any food, right? So then this leads to them committing acts of, like, it leads to desperation, and they end up killing some innocent people, all right?
Yeah.
So if the narrative that these people are using is like, oh, like, they like Pedro Castillo is like a communist, right? So they have, all right, they have what, let's say they have this communist president now. Shouldn't they stop then? Shouldn't they stop with the terrorist attacks because they got what they wanted? And also, like Pedro Castillo, what he's offering people is he wants to give these people more money, put food on the table for them, improve their healthcare, give them more education. If they had their basic needs met, isn't that going to reduce desperation and reduce the chances of them becoming terrorists, right? And then like people say, oh no, like he doesn't know what he's doing, he doesn't know how to run his economy. They give all these like racist talking points, also talking about how he's not educated because of the way that he talks. And they say, oh, but Keiko, at least she's going to open up more jobs for people and bring more tourists in. Like it's these these Reaganomic talking points that they're buying into.
You're right, Franco. It is racist. There's a lot of that. There's that aspect too. The same aspect that was in Bolivia, right? You have not just the working class, but a lot of the working class, of course, is also indigenous, and you have that element there. Obviously, it's not everything, right? But it's definitely something that's part of it's part of it. This idea that people like Evo Morales, people like Nicolas Maduro, people like Hugo Chavez before when he was alive, they're not brought up from these elite schools where they get taught. A lot of the people who have become presidents of Peru, I know this, aren't even from Peru. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're like educated in other parts of the country. They're Western indoctrined, and they don't know the people of Peru, the history of Peru, the indigenous culture of Peru, and so they were educated at Harvard, so that makes them likely to be a better president of a country that has a population of indigenous people that feels completely just left behind. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you should have somebody elected that's going to be representative of the country, and the vast majority of people in that country are of indigenous descent. They
Yeah.
just are, and they have different points of views than somebody from the city. And again, this is why a lot of these people do not like the media. Even, they're even cautious towards me. They ask me where I'm from and all the stuff, like, and some of them are like, well, thank you for being here, because we don't see very many Americans. And it's crazy to me, again, like, why is this such little coverage, right? The moment he wins, I think, is where you're going to see the attention diverted, because until today, I didn't see really much on mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
Today, CNN, MSNBC, they started saying, "Oh, out of nowhere comes Pedro Castillo, blah blah blah." That's now they're like, "Okay, wait a minute. Like, he's likely to win now, so we're gonna start paying attention." But it's just like it's a very divisive race in the terms of the working class versus the upper echelons. But unfortunately, because of the propaganda, the reason it's so close is because that a lot of that working class has been brainwashed against their own self-interest. And this is what happens, in America, I guess, with Democrats and Republicans. It happens even more with the right. Like, you have a lot of working class white people in the South and the Midwest who have voted against their own interests for establishment candidates, whether there be Democrat or Republican. They vote for people thinking that because X person went to Yale, that they're somehow better equipped than somebody that's less experienced. And that same mentality, that same capitalist mentality, predator class, elitist mentality, it lives here. And that's a result, of course, of Western propaganda, and how the United States is still deemed to be of high esteem even today. I mean, not as high as it was before, but still, like, if, for instance, if you're buying a Budweiser compared to buying a Cusqueña, which is
Mm-hmm.
the beer of Peru, which is, by the way, way better than a Budweiser. Um, it costs you way more money to buy the Budweiser because it's American, and the taxes and all of that. So it's this idea that American Western is better, and the un indio, right? What they
Mm-hmm.
call un indio, no, they don't know what they're talking about. They're ignorant. They're this, they're that, and that's a stigma that has to end. And that reminds me a lot of Evo Morales, who he was and how he came to power, and the racism that he also had to put out with him. They called him cholo, they called him all
Mm-hmm.
these things. Like, they think of them as lesser than because of how they speak and what they value and how they think. And with Castillo being a rondero, That's another issue where they mock that and they call them terrorists when they were the ones defending their people, their communities from terrorism. I would equate them to a sort of community type of police, like a citizen type of police that they developed, and they try to be nonviolent as much as possible. So
So I just want to ask this final question here for you, Fiorella. Supposedly DSA is there. I haven't heard a peep from them. Are they even there?
I'm assuming they're there. I think they were part of the delegation that had Code Pink, that had
Mm,
ESA, and another group, Progressive International, I think is their name. But I didn't see them. I actually was communicating with a journalist here who speaks Spanish, so she doesn't speak good English. She was getting me in contact with them. She sent them multiple emails, CC'd them, and because I was asking to interview them to ask them questions about what they saw at the election, and none of them got back to me. I was able to speak to Medea Benjamin earlier and ask her
hmm.
some questions about it, but other than her, who represents Code Pink, I did not get a chance to talk to them. Maybe they saw my profile and saw that I'm not a fan of DSA. I don't know. But I mean, I'd be willing to talk to them. I mean, as like a journalist, I'd talk to anybody, especially coming from a
Yeah,
place of election, like understanding elections, looking at elections, talking about the chain of custody and seeing how Peru has done their elections. I agree that their elections are actually primarily mostly well done in terms of the process, in terms of the front of the house. Like, there's like 3 to 5 minute wait lines. They do, paper ballots for the most part everywhere. Lima had some electronic machines, and they got rid of most of them for this round. And they have a little box made out of like a literal box where people drop their ballots, and they had assigned times to vote according to their DNI, but it
hmm,
wasn't like super, like if you couldn't come at that time, it was fine. You just let them know. Like, and they really had tight security during that time. Now, the issue that Medea and I agree with is during the counting process. During that because that's done not out in the open. It's not done for the public to see. That's done privately
right.
is when they count. What I do like is that they count things after everybody votes. They don't start counting before. They start counting after people vote. So it's not like, oh, you're in the middle of the line and you're waiting to vote for a third party candidate and they already named Hillary Clinton the winner. That doesn't happen here. But the media will start saying here, like for example, this poll said that Keiko Fujimori is destined to lead. They'll say things like that, right?
Mm,
They'll manipulate it. They're not supposed to, but they'll still do it. But they won't like actually start counting the votes. And the way they did it yesterday was they released it at 7, I think after 10, and then we had the first result after of the by the organization in charge directly from the government. That was the first result, and we knew that those results were going to first favor Keiko because those were Lima first and the
right.
nearby areas which more heavily favored for her. And so I'm looking at the elections, and I'm looking too at the fact that they have one day to vote, that it's mandatory to vote if you're under the age of 65. If you're over the age of 65, you don't have to vote, but
Hmm.
you can. And the only issue I see is they're still lacking accessibility, like technology for people who are disabled to vote. So they had to like take tables down from the second or third floors to make sure the people who are disabled could vote. They still need to work on things like that, accessibility, but their security as far as like, there's no vote by mail. You have to show an ID. These are things that Americans would consider draconian
Right.
and like extremely right wing, but these are things that actually make it more difficult for corruption to happen. So as I always say, and Pasta says it too, there's got to be a balance between the accessibility of voting and the security of voting. You can't have one or the other out of whack, or you're doing a disservice to the people. And it's crazy that Peru can figure out how to get all of their country to vote in one day and not have long lines where you have to argue of how like whether somebody can give somebody water or somebody can give somebody pizza. Why are we arguing about that? That should in America, like that should never be the argument. The argument is, hello, these people should be in and out, like of a voting center.
Exactly.
Like they should be in and out. Like if they can figure it out with zero technology, with the way we have, with all of these, circumstances, with people coming in buses and from far away places, and with all the traffic in Peru, how the hell can the United States not figure this shit out? Like it makes you think.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's not just Peru. It's all the other South American countries also that have this. You
Yeah.
know, more secure elections, their process is more organized. And from what I'm hearing, is that this is actually one of the most disorganized elections that Peru has had because of the pandemic. But
Yep.
regardless, what you're seeing is like this is like way more cleaner, way faster than what the U.S. does. Joni Bug, thank you very much for the super. Ray said, thank you for covering the elections in Peru. Jim Garrison said, a 5-spot 4 fee and her truth telling. And Summer of 1970, thank you very much for the super. Ray said, good job. Fiorella, thank you very much for stopping by. You're doing excellent work. I hope that more people bring you on because you are covering something that a lot of other people aren't covering. I think you're the only independent journalist that I know that's on the ground there right now from the U.S. Is there any final message you want to leave the people with?
Yeah, I mean, let's learn from Peruvians and what they're doing and how they are trying to get rid of corruption. Obviously, it's very similar stories we hear: corrupt mainstream media, corrupt politicians, politicians that get bought, and election fraud, right? Election malfeasance, whatever you want to call it. It's just lack of transparency. I think there's a lot we can learn from Peruvians and the way they do this and the way they get out in the streets just with any sort of indication that there's going to be some sort of fraud. They make these politicians fearful. They allow themselves to go out and strike and unite and organize to get the things they want. And even if they keep, Peru has had just a plethora of corrupt presidents. They're trying to figure out a way to end that. People are fed up. People are poor, they're working class. We have more in common with working class Peruvians than we do with our politicians. Our politicians have a lot in common with each other. They're all corrupt, they're all
Mm-hmm.
bought out. And by the way, Peru has a better healthcare system than the United States. The employers
Yeah.
give healthcare to the people, and if the employers don't like, if the person is too poor or they don't work, the state does. Now, do they need improvements? Absolutely. They need more accessibility to just cheaper medicine, to better technology. And that's kind of what Pedro Castillo was talking about, right? And when he spoke about the vaccine, he spoke about the Russian
Mm-hmm.
vaccine, which I thought was interesting. And yeah, but they don't have the middleman, which is the big pharma, the insurance companies. So again, if Peru can like give their people more healthcare, if they can go to, if they break their leg, they can go in and get treated. What's stopping the United States? Oh, that's right. Like it's because we're not like our country's owned by corporations. It's owned by state agencies. This is a reality, and stop thinking that we are the greatest country in the world when other countries, at the very least, the working class, the left in other countries, is ready to fight and have a revolution if they don't get what they demand. So just keep that in perspective. Thank you for bringing me on, Franco, and thank you for having the patience. It's been really crazy here, so I
Oh, I
apologize for
understand. Yeah,
having.
I know how hectic it can be there. Fiorella, you're
Yeah.
killing it. Johnny on the
I
ones
might
and
go back
twos.
out there actually.
Oh, you're about to go back out there. Awesome.
I
Yeah,
might go back out there, so we'll see.
yeah. Johnny's killing it too on the ones and twos, broadcasting this. Pasta's also killing it. He's over at Georgia. I'm gonna have him on tomorrow. We're gonna talk about what he's been looking at over at Georgia with election integrity. But once again, people, subscribe to the Convo Couch, and yeah, stay informed, everybody.